we have a full agenda today, so I'll just be brief. I just want to say thank you again for all your hard work. The work of this group is definitely, as you know, it's very important, and we are, as the process has been designed, we are welcoming your feedback, adjusting accordingly, and you'll hear more about that today, and making sure that we can provide you all with the information that you need, as well as the larger community with the information that they need to help inform this process so that we can get to a really strong end product and result. So thank you, Anna, for your time. And I know we're going to get into a presentation soon, so I will hold further comment until then.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ona Ferguson here with Maggie Osties from the Consensus Building Institute. We'll be guiding you through the meeting today. We're really happy you are here. This meeting is being recorded. The recording gets posted on Pegasus and on the project website. We'll put that link into the chat. And Maggie, do you want to just mention tech things for a moment, just for attendees and panelists, so they know what to expect if they haven't attended before?
Yep. This is a Zoom webinar, so all of our advisory committee members are panelists, and your mute and your unmute and your video on and off and your chat can all be found in your toolbar. For folks that are observing from the public, the webinar is set up so that your video is automatically turned off, as is your microphone. When we get to the public comment period later on in the meeting, we will instruct you how to raise your hand if you would like to give comment, and then we can make it so you can unmute and speak.
Thank you. Perfect. All right, I'm just pasting in the link to the agenda. We are going to go fairly quickly through some committee business. Everyone, this is our 5th meeting, with the site visit a couple weeks ago to Andover being our 4th. Thank you so much for those of you who were able to join. It was great fun to see people in person and learn together, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. The agenda for today, Maggie, would you pull that up? Is the big focus of our session today is ecological considerations. We have had questions about the ecology of what's going on in the river, what's likely happening, what we know around the 2 different choices that we've been thinking through. And we're going to have Nick Wildman and Allison Roy tell us some of what they can say and why and what we know. We also are going to spend a little bit of time right now talking about the field trip and also a few adjustments and expansions that the planning team would like to suggest with all of you. So we'll do that right now. Then we'll get into the ecological considerations piece. We will take a short break and get into public comment at 6:05 and wrap up by 6:30. We know many of you have another meeting after this, so thanks for being here and for your patience. We are making additional space for public input tonight and going forward. Committee members, if you would be so kind, we're going to do introductions just in the chat today in the interest of time. So if you would, in the chat, and making sure you're sending to everyone so everyone can see it, share your name, your relevant affiliation, and in the spirit of October, a favorite costume of yours. Ideally a costume that you've worn, but if not that, then a costume somebody else wore. And we'll get that going in the chat for a moment. So name, affiliation, and a favorite costume. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that. All right. Oh, I like MK has a recent one. Excellent. All right, I'm going to start in on some committee business that I think is fairly quick, but want to make sure to note with all of you. First off, we'd like to approve the meeting summaries from meeting 3 and also meeting 4, which was the site visit. Thanks to those of you who shared some reflections from the site visit to make that summary. Any comments or concerns about either of those two summaries before we post them so that everyone can read them? All right, considering those approved, thank you.
Ona, David Loudon
Julian,
had his hand.
David, thank you. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question on the page 2, the bullet point speed spillway removal construction process.
Which
So-
which day are you in?
The online meeting.
Okay, that third meeting.
Yeah, meeting number 3. The spillway removal construction process, the first point under that. I guess I missed that. Are they really saying that we could, one thing you could just do is take out part of the dam, like across it, like a third of it or a half of it, and leave the rest of it at its full height?
I saw some other questions about that in public comment also, for those of you who had a chance to read the packet of materials we sent. I don't know the answer to that. And in the interest of time, David, what I'd like to do is flag it to get back to you on that.
That's
Is
fine.
that okay?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
fine.
thank
Just
you.
didn't make much sense to me.
Thank you. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, it was actually to answer David's question. I understood that as more of a thought exercise, that they just, from an engineering perspective, they wanted to see if they only remove partial part of that spillway, would it still take the pressure off the earthen dam? And so it would solve the problem of not having to repair the dam. So I thought it was more of an engineering exercise. I don't think the idea was to just remove part and leave the cement structure there exposed, but I could be wrong.
All right, we will come back to that because I do think there are a couple of other questions related to that. That was the first time we had heard that terminology, and make sure that we kind of know what's going on with that. Thank you. Anything else on the summaries? Great. Some of you may have received an email, committee members, saying you need to reapply for a board or commission you are on. We're only partway through, don't go anywhere. Jamie has said he will just extend the time frame and can do that himself, but do let Maggie or me know if you have any questions or concerns about that. Otherwise, we'll assume we should just go ahead and do that. Public comment. We have a new and expanded public comment approach, and I want to just say what that is a little bit so you all know what's going on with that. We are proposing to make space in our meetings for the public to speak who want to share things verbally with the committee. And also, as we have always, are taking public comment that's addressed to the committee and sharing it with you, but we formalized how we're doing that. If committee members, if members of the public address comments to the full committee and send them to Maggie or me, we will package them, collect them together, and get them to you. If they do that by 10 a.m. the morning of the meeting, we'll send them to you then. And then as soon as we put the meeting summary together, we'll attach any comments between then and when the meeting summary go out. So essentially there are 2 batches, but when the meeting summaries are blessed by you and go up on the public website, they will include the attachments of the public comment that you all received. So it's everyone can look at kind of what people are sharing, thoughts and questions that are coming from the public. Maggie, did I get any of that wrong? I was doing it quick, and I know there's some nuance there.
I think that you framed that correctly.
Okay. We think this is going to be good. We hope it's going to work, and we'll just keep adjusting as we go if we need to. But that's the plan for now. For members of the public who are attending tonight, again, we're going to have public comment a little after 6. I think it would be helpful if you would let Maggie know. Maggie, I meant to coordinate this with you. If you would like to make public comment, or maybe just put in the chat that you would like to make public comment so we can know. Maggie,
We
don't do that.
don't have
Go.
chat open, so
Thank you. That doesn't work.
We can just do raise hands.
We'll do raise hands at the
during-
time and we'll just see. Okay, that's great. And then finally, just to note, again, we've extended the meeting 30 minutes to allow for public comment, and because I think we need a little stretch break in there if we're going to go 2.5 hours. So that's in the agenda. I think I want to show the slide on the work plan, Maggie, as a reminder to the committee of where we are, and a reminder to everyone of where we are in this process. You see the star, we're at meeting number 5. We're talking about ecological considerations. On November, I want to say 9th, our next meeting is meeting 6. We're going to talk about cultural resources and legal considerations. On November 30th, I think, is meeting 7. And we're going to be talking about community use and recreation considerations. And then in mid-December or early January, meeting 8 will be financial considerations. And interspersed with that, just to name on the lower part of the slide, you can see some of the community engagement pieces. We expect to do a couple more public engagement, sort of more robust pieces. And I think Jamie will talk about that in a minute or two, but that's coming up and we want you to know what that's going to be about. So with that, I want to take just a few minutes to give people a chance to share what they learned or saw at the Andover site tour, and we could take down that slide. So committee members who were in Andover a couple of weekends ago, what did you see? What did you learn? What jumped out at you? For the people who weren't there, is there anything important you want to share from having seen 2 sites with dams where our dams had been in the past? Feel free again to raise your virtual hand, your real hand, or just chime in if it's quiet. Yeah, Claire, go ahead.
I know a number of my comments ended up in the site summary, but I know it was a topic that was much discussed, the potential for invasive species popping up in the impoundment area after the water has been drained out. Should we go with the spillway removal option? And I was genuinely pleasantly surprised at how many native species there were at the dam site that we visited on Saturday. It was the first one. In speaking with the Andover conservation agent, there was a presence of invasives existing prior to the dam removal, but from his perspective, there was fairly minimal increase of those areas of invasive species post dam removal, and that a lot of the species that were popping up post dam removal were natives or non-invasive species, and that was a welcome thing to see.
Thank you. Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just repeat some of the things that I wrote for those who didn't read it. The one had to do with invasives. I'm not as discouraged about the invasives as I was initially. So I understand now that some of those were there already, but I think that's something we have to pay attention to. Another was that they didn't really pay any attention to public parks because that probably just wasn't in their mandate. And that's something we have to do. For example, I noted that there's these beautiful ripples and rapids that you can't really see. I tried to get a view of it. There's no place you can see them from. So, we need a public viewing spot. That's a priority for us. And then the other one was the navigability, which we started talking about last time. And I was just sort of it more confirmed my concern that once you have a river that's going to descend 12 feet in this case, or in our case, 6 feet. Either way, it's going to cause rapids, and it's going to be difficult to navigate, and particularly going upstream. So it was clear from observing that, and I also found the Shawseen River Watershed Association called it a class 3 rapids, which is something that requires rather expert navigation. And that's probably not something we want in Natick, but we have to consider what we're going to get in Natick.
Thank you. I believe, and Nick can correct me because Nick was involved in that, but that they also didn't design for navigability. And it seems like the message we're getting is that we could design for that. So we'll talk about that more. Thank
Absolutely.
you, Martin. Jillian, go ahead.
I was struck by how flooding was such an important question in the community, and how their analysis found and has since proven that removing the dams, which were similar, I believe, in terms of run-of-river dams, that it didn't impact downstream in terms of like making flooding better or worse. And the other thing that struck me that I hadn't thought about, and I didn't submit it for the notes, was that there had actually been, I think, 1 or 2 drownings that were related to the presence of dams there. And that was powerful. And I hadn't thought about that. And I don't know how much of a risk our dam is for that, but it was just notable to me.
Thank you. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple points that I thought makes it different, their project different than ours, or lessons learned, is the funding. I thought was obviously very important to them as they navigated the legal ownership and got funding from different sources as they restore the river. I think that's something to keep in mind as we're looking at either repair or restore. If there's a design that makes sense on the restore end of things, that there may be funding available to us to expand parks and things like that, and accessibility. And the flooding was obviously a big concern of them, as they talked about the I think it was an elder community that the whole first floor flooded historically, and they certainly didn't want to make that worse. And as it turns out, it didn't make it worse, so that's good. So I think for people downstream, for sure, I think that makes us feel a little better. And then I think there's just real differences between the two projects. Their river does fall, the plane is much different. Their rapids are a result of a grade difference that we don't have here. There is a 6-foot spillway, but the river doesn't drop 6 feet. The floor of our river going across that is, by the chart I saw, is 1 to 1.5 feet. So, I mean, the Charles River is a very slow moving river. That's why it's so brown. It's because it's like a tea stew out there. So it's a slow moving river that drops, about 6 feet per mile or something like that. So there's just differences there. And certainly there is an opportunity, as they did, to create a riffle, to create some noise, to create some scenic areas that we certainly should be able to take advantage of. So,
Thank you, Terry, and then MK.
Thank you. And I don't want to repeat things that folks have said already, but I think it was striking to me in looking at how the kind of the former pond area, and this is for the dam near the Atria Senior Living. But you could still see the kind of the form of the pond, almost the shape, although it was now kind of very much filled in with vegetation. So it kind of created that sort of embracing feel that the form of a pond gives, which I thought was interesting, even though it was now kind of clearly dry land, or at least some of it was dry. So in terms of understanding that, also as a flag for the days when this is under construction and people are looking at it going, oh my God, this looks terrifying. They describe what had been done at that point, what they needed to do during construction, and talk about not being able to see a trace of kind of the incursions that they made with heavy machinery to do the work. And so it was helpful because it was reassuring that what something looks like that's terrifying temporarily isn't the permanent fixture. And then the last point is that one of the speakers, when I was talking with them, I asked why they had done a riffle that had no channel that would more clearly allow for like canoe or kayak navigation. And they said it could be done. They didn't choose to do it, but that it could be done. So to Martin's point, it was good to see that that they thought that something like that would be viable. That's it.
Thank you. MK and then Dirk.
One thing that both Terry and Mike alluded to, but I just wanted to chime in my observations on it was that there had been intentionally created riffles at these dams, but one of the things that was said was that one of the riffles was a natural riffle that had been there prior to the lake, I believe, or prior to the dam being installed, that was kind of re-emerged as a result of the falling river level. So the idea that it wouldn't necessarily need to be an entirely constructed feature, I think, is interesting. Obviously, it was sort of an unexpected benefit. So I don't know that it's something that could be relied upon from a design perspective, but I did think that was really interesting that it was something that was designed for, but also something that the natural course of the river just happened to have. And I think another thing that I found really interesting, not just the dam, but kind of the area at large, was keeping all of the historic structures that related to the use that dam had served, but also that whole area had served. It looked like some of the concrete structures that had remained actually predated the dam removal, so that they, had a very good sense of place that, of historic place that they maintained. It wasn't just, trying to keep a couple features. It was kind of part of a larger, view of keeping former features and keeping the character of the area. So.
Thank you. Dirk, and then we're going to wrap this part of our discussion up.
Thank you. I found the upstream part of their project had more kind of congruence, more overlap with, I think, issues that we will be considering than the downstream one. The major thing on the downstream side, which has been mentioned, I think Terry may have mentioned it, was the care taken to cross the field facilities and to stage construction on them, both in terms of time and in terms of measures taken, protective measures taken at the time of construction. And I think that is certainly something we need to be well aware of, and well aware of how to plan and scope for whatever project we do, whether it's restoration or return. But the upstream part definitely had, I think, more interest to me, and some have mentioned, I think the thing that really struck me was the return of habitat. And people have mentioned plant habitat, but it's not just plant habitat. I mean, it was a very rich, river marsh habitat. And, previously had been a mill pond with less opportunity for quite the ecosystem that we were looking at there. I mean, I've been doing these things for some decades. So when I look at a space, I have some idea of the richness of the ecosystem that I'm looking at. That was an awfully rich ecosystem, and a mill pond is okay, but doesn't get that rich. So I think that's the choice we're looking at, and it's part of the thing that we need to be thinking about, what's going to be there either way.
Thank you. That's like the perfect transition to the presentations we're going to do in just a few minutes. Thank you all. I know there's more to say. I hope you continue to think about the visit and what we can pull from that and bring that forward in our conversations. I also want to name, just in case it's not totally clear, we visited that one as sort of an example of one of our options. We're also talking about site visit to a repaired dam. So Jillian will say more about that later, but we want to see all of these. I would like to go to Jamie to share some updates on how we're thinking about a few pieces that we've been sort of gathering input on Jamie, I'm going to hand this over to you.
So you want me to speak now? Sure, great.
I do.
So, and this will come up a little bit during the presentation and in the coming community meetings, but one of the things that came out from this, I can see, hang on, let me just change my screen location. The brightness of the sun is behind me.
Line of scrimmage. She checks the play sheet, goes.
So it's not like somebody was about to score a touchdown. One of the things that's come up throughout this process, which I think speaks to the success of this process, is the ability for us to respond to the feedback that we're getting from the community and from this group as well, this working group. And as we move forward, we want to continue to both collectively work together on providing feedback, but also respond to where we see the need to do additional research, do additional design work, basically do additional collaboration. So in the spirit of that, I think it's a great time at this point in the process for me to highlight a few things that the staff level we're seeking to do to help inform all of you in your review and the community at large in the broader decision-making process. First and foremost, I wanted to share with you that we are definitely advancing some scope of work with GZA to advance some of the regulatory and sort of hard civil engineering work on some of the additional alternatives that have come up in discussion with the community groups at large, as well as at this level. And these include scopes that might look at some additional alternatives beyond just the two that we have started design work on. Not to say that we want to veer too far away from those, but just looking at, for example, can we do something with reinforcing the existing structures or dam? What else can we be doing from a just strict engineering and regulatory compliance perspective? That'll help us just in the overall process, in my opinion, to make sure that we're looking at sort of a broad spectrum of alternatives here. But concurrently with that, we are also advancing work and with hopefully our partners at the state to look at some of the existing design work, because based on comments and questions from this body, there were questions, for example, that if the spillway was to be removed, can we channel sort of a lane for kayaks and canoes to go up and down the river? Are there other things that we can do from a design consideration perspective? So we are looking to advance that design work just so that we can answer some of those questions from this body and from the community at large. And so I've asked staff to also work with GZA and others to advance those conversations and to advance that work. We really want to make sure that we're, again, being responsive to what the community is asking as potential options and as different alternatives, or as different options within a single alternative. So we want to make sure that we can respond with appropriate guidance from those various perspectives. And then finally, and I think this was previously mentioned today, really re-engaging or engaging further with the community and with this group, as well as we lead into one of our November meetings, which is more focused on community use and recreation, about what makes this place special. What do people want to continue to see here when it comes to the feeling of this space 5 years from now, 10 years from now, for the future? What do we enjoy about this space today? And what do we want to try to preserve, or what are the things that really make this place special? And it's not necessarily about, I mean, it can be about the hard existing spaces and the engineering spaces right now, but it's also about the feel of the space. What do people enjoy? Why do they come here? What do they experience when they're at this location, the sense of place, essentially? That's going to be an iterative process, to be fair. We're going to have to seek that input from both all of you as well as the community at large through different methods. And I encourage everybody to, I know everybody here has already been down at the dam, but continue to go to the dam, but maybe think of it from a different perspective. Sit there for a little while and enjoy the space, figure out what do you enjoy most about the space, to help inform that process. And that'll help us as we continue forward with really any of the options, and work to engage, maybe some landscape architects or some other design professionals that can help us with the options. And once we know what the hard engineering is going to be, help us understand how can we ensure that whatever the future of this dam area becomes, really encapsulates or preserves or enhances what makes this place special and what makes people wanting to be at this location. So those are some questions and some guidance principles that I've deliberately asked the staff to advance with GZA and others. And I know we have some professionals from the state here today that I think are going to help us through that process moving forward as well, which I think is extremely valuable for us to have our state partners engaged in this process throughout, because this is not an easy process. This is not an easy solution. We don't know today what our answer is going to be. And we just want to make sure that we have the information that this group, as well as the community at large, needs to make an informed decision. I know we have a lot more to cover today, so I'm going to leave at that, but I do want people to know that I'm always here to listen. So if folks on the panel or in the community, please reach out to me at any time, or reach out to the staff members that are here to reach out to me. And we, again, the process is designed to collect feedback and respond accordingly. So I think it's proving to be a successful process, in my opinion. One thing that has come up at just in general discussions is how are we paying for all this? Fortunately, through grants and through past appropriations from town meeting, we do have enough funding at this time to cover this work. So I don't want people to be too worried about asking a question that might lead to some additional design work. I think if a little bit of upfront money at this point, or seeking some additional grant dollars at this point, will go a long way to ensuring that the long-term solution is really one that the community can embrace. So please don't worry about the cost considerations at this time. So thank you very much, Ona, and I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. So again, anyone, if you have questions, there are these various pieces we will be moving forward on in response to all of your good input. And I want to have us jump into the ecological considerations piece. So with no further ado, I'm going to invite Nick Wildman from the Division of Ecological Restoration to share with us on some key topics and questions that we've asked him, and a few of us have worked with him ahead of time to tee up the questions from the committee and from the public. And actually, Maggie will kick us off with just a reminder to all of us about what we heard in that public input, and then he'll launch in, and then we'll go from him to Alice and Roy. So Maggie, you're up for the summary piece.
Just a really quick kind of reminder, because we did get such rich community input, especially on this ecological question. So I'll just lift up a couple of things that stood out from the different community input sessions, as well as from the survey. People had a lot of questions under kind of either option, either repair or removal, about impacts to water temperature and water quality. People were wondering about the ecological impacts of construction, which I think ties in nicely to kind of what Dirk was talking about and his reflection. People asked questions about how fish species would be affected, and what impacts would be to the existing habitat in the impoundment area. We also heard questions about kind of the climate implications under either scenario, such as like carbon sequestration potential, or climate resilience and flood resilience potential. We heard questions about what is the scale of potential benefit to the ecosystem from the removal of the spillway. People understanding that it could have some benefits, but wanting to know kind of like how beneficial could that be. Wanting to concerns were raised about invasive species and kind of what can be expected during like the restoration phase under the spillway removal option for that new land that's created or revealed. And then people had questions kind of about the flow of sediment and how that could change under the spillway removal option. So that's a very, very quick review of some of the questions that we received during the community input in May and June around this process.
Thank you, Maggie. Nick, over to you.
All right, very good. Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Jump right in. Well, thanks very much. That's not where I wanted to start. Hang on, close your eyes, everyone. Don't look. Thanks so much for having me. And it was really, really helpful for Jillian and Ona and the gang to forward me those questions. I'm really happy to talk with you all tonight. My name is Nick Wildman. I've been working on dam removal since 2007. Feel free to get in touch with me anytime if you have questions about dam removal in general or other projects that we're working on. As you can see from this photo, dam removal can be something to be happy about. If you haven't heard of our small division, we are one of the smaller divisions within the Department of Fish and Game. Our main office is in Boston, but we do have some staff located at an office in Westfield State, and we work all over the state. Our mission is to protect and restore the rivers, wetlands, and waterways of Massachusetts for both people and the environment. So our work touches on a lot of subjects, all revolving around aquatic restoration. So in my presentation tonight, I'm going to talk through some of the things that Jillian and Ona and Maggie shared with me as having been raised as concerns, and reference some of my experience in those matters. You know, I'm familiar with the GZA work that has happened here. I'm not intimately familiar with the technical side of it per se, nor am I, you know, have all the answers for this site. So I hope you'll understand that. But I'm very much looking forward to questions and comments at the end. So my first slide really talks about why does anything called the Division of Ecological Restoration, why does anyone care about dam removal? Why are we doing this? And so this slide is kind of a corny illustration of how rivers work on dammed conditions. So in an idealized river situation like you have here, flow from left to right, you know, we have a river that is moving water and sediment, as you can see at the bottom. Those are two very important functions of every river and stream. And what I'm picturing here are riverine fish. And that's to remind us that for thousands and thousands of years, the rivers of North America were evolving and changing, and along with that were the species that were associated with those environments. And so we have these river obligate fish and wildlife species, including invertebrates like mussels and clams, that really evolved for thousands of years to live in a cool, free-flowing environment in order to do things like spawning, feeding, and just moving when conditions change, because rivers are very dynamic systems, of course. When we build dams on rivers, we essentially, and this is somewhat analogous to the South Natick Dam in the sense that what we've done is we've basically put a bump in the road. We're elevating the water surface up higher toward the sky, and in some ways, depending on the river and the geology around there, spreading it out. And so what that means is there's more surface area under the sun. When that sun beats down, those fish downstream and those habitats are feeling those temperature impacts. The work that Dr. Roy is going to present on tonight is bread and butter demonstration of that phenomenon. And so those things can be very damaging to those riverine species that have evolved for cold water. Dams are also excellent at capturing sediment, whether the river is steep or shallow or flat, like the Charles, I should say. Rivers can capture up to 70 some odd % of the annual sediment load for a river. And while in some ways that's kind of nice because downstream gets all real rocky and pretty often, the actual condition that we see there is more better described as sediment starvation, because those small grains, whether they sand or silt or small gravels that get captured by the dam, are important for the habitat functions for fish and wildlife downstream. Also, that accumulated sediment in this warm water is perfect breeding ground for a lot of aquatic plants. And nothing wrong with plants, but as those plants age and die and fall into the water, their decomposition sucks up oxygen that is otherwise dissolved in the water. Not an ideal situation for most of our native fish, but for more fish that have evolved for lake environments, they're pretty excited. They've got low, they can tolerate the high temps, they can tolerate the low dissolved oxygen. And so we've extirpated our cold water species like trout and other things and made a habitat that's much more suitable for things like sucker and bass and what have you. So all these are impacts on the river. In addition, I want to mention that by creating a large impoundment, what we've done is we've created an anoxic environment that typically emits methane into the atmosphere. And as many of you know, methane is a very important, in fact, more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So there's some thought that some scientists have been given toward that. We have over 3,000 dams in Massachusetts, as you may know. Those are just the ones we know about. We find new ones every year, kind of poking around the woods or getting calls from landowners. So those impacts that I'm talking about are really quite widespread. It's very rare in Massachusetts, in fact, for any river or stream to have only one dam. In fact, most have more. The good thing we have on our side is that these rivers have been evolving in their landscapes for thousands of years. And so even though the dams that we see in Massachusetts are almost all of them extremely very historic and important to our current history, so to speak, 200 years or more, those are relatively recent impacts from a river from an ecological perspective. And what that means is that by removing the dam, those ecological processes, the movement of sediment, water, fish, wildlife, nutrients, carbon, et cetera, renormalize quite quickly. Dam removal has become a trend across the nation. There have been 65 dams removed in Massachusetts since 1999. The graph here shows both New England and Massachusetts, the number of dams removed, going back to 2006 here. American Rivers publishes this information usually every February. And we're always excited to see where Massachusetts falls in the list. But, you know, for these reasons, including the cost to the owners, more owners are choosing to remove dams than they were, say, 10, 20 years ago. Across Massachusetts, you know, we've worked with or are working with a number of communities that either have completed or are planning to remove dams. The ones you see here, I don't have time to talk about all of these, but the ones you see bolded and in italics are ones that are on larger rivers, somewhat more analogous to the Charles River than others. And so it's really interesting to see. We're really glad to have quite a geographic spread of these dam removals and the diversity of settings, as we saw in Andover for some of those who were there, compared with dams that you can imagine in the Berkshires, North Berkshires, et cetera, in other rural environments. There can be quite a range of opportunities, and each is a little bit different. So who cares about the South Natick Dam? Why is that important? Well, that's a question that we at DER consider quite often, not just for South Natick, but for all the 3,000 dams that we have in Massachusetts. So if you go to our division's website, you can find something called the Restoration Potential Model. It's now in its 4th iteration, and we're always kind of updating it and improving the data that it relies on. And what it is it's basically just a GIS tool. It's only as good as the information that goes into it. And for most dams, it's not ground truth, so there can be some irregularities. It's only a kind of a tool to start thinking about this. But what it does is it assigns values for different attributes that are important to healthy rivers. The amount of impervious surface or paving in the environment, for example, can be an important consideration for the hydrology of the river, how much water it's moving at different times, as well as the quality of the water, for example. The position of a dam within a river, whether it be near the mouth or in the headwaters, and where that dam is in relation to other dams. As I said before, it's very common to have other dams on the river. All of these different things play into the ultimate numeric score that each dam gets. And so we have this snazzy little map. You can kind of look around and find all these dams that have been inventoried. And again, it's not all of them. So it's just those 3,000. And what it does is it assigns a score that can be looked at in terms of the restoration potential, the potential to renaturalize ecological processes at that dam. And we're able to compare that both across the entire state of Massachusetts, as well as give it a score within its major basin. So in this case, within the Charles River Basin. And as you can see, the South Natick Dam scores in the 90th percentile on both of those. So I'd encourage you to spend some time. It's very easy to find that tool on our website or just simply by Googling it and see what goes into it. There's a nice document that describes the data and the thought process behind it. And again, just a planning tool, definitely something that allows us an entryway into thinking more about a site. A lot of times, the first question folks would like to know is, how do you even remove this thing? You know, it's gushing with water most times of the year. It's made of concrete, or in other cases, masonry or other things. How the heck do you just get after this thing? Well, in some cases, the best, safest, and most ecologically responsive way to do it is to simply get in and kind of chip away the dam, allowing the channel to form. Here's a site from Central Mass, just west of the Quabbin, where we did just that. You can see on the left the masonry and concrete of this dam. And because the sediment behind it was so clean, and because the downstream reaches needed that sediment so critically, we were able to simply use the hammers and the excavators to break down the dam and gradually allow that river to take its own shape. Now, in more urban settings, like we have here in South Natick, like you folks saw in Andover, what we really need to be doing is thinking more about how that sediment is going to move relative to its volume and its quality in terms of, you know, our legacy contaminants that we have in most of our rivers, as well as how that channel will form. A self-forming channel is often, you know, the science tells us, is actually much better than one that's created in many ways, less room for error, so to speak. However, when we're in environments with private property and important public and private infrastructure, allowing the channel to do just about whatever it wants isn't always a great option. And that's something we talked about at the Marlin Place site in Andover. All right, so then what are we going to do? What would we do here if we were going out there tomorrow to take this dam out? Well, the simple answer is, first, we have to divert the water. Typically, you don't want to be working with the machines underwater or sitting in water. And so with that, or at least in moving water. So the first move is to divert the flow to one side or the other. And typically the way that's done is with a cofferdam. And it can be very complicated, or it can simply be very large sandbags that the contractor places to divert the water so that they can work in a relatively quiet, if not totally dewatered area. Once that's done, it's simply a matter of removing one side, stabilizing the banks, building the channel as needed, and then moving to the other side so that you can allow the river to assume its new channel. So you see we're kind of like doing one side in this silly image, and then we're doing the other. So functionally, practically, bare bones speaking, that is sort of how one might remove a dam like the South Natick Dam. The construction impacts can be pretty substantial. Here's a site, here's a drone image that we had taken during the removal of the Holmes Dam in Plymouth, an extremely historic dam on Town Brook. Town Brook, if you're familiar, is at the mouth of which was where the Pilgrims settled, and the journals of Miles Standish and others talk about the alewife and fish using the brook. So an extremely historic place where we, along with the town of Plymouth, have removed 4 dams since 2002. So I show you this picture because, boy, it looks like a war zone, doesn't it? I mean, it looks like a bomb went off. This area below the dam, this is looking upstream, and below the dam, you can see the area that had once been a park. If you go there today, it's an even better, more beautiful park, in just about anybody's estimation. So I wanted to show you this because, yeah, these are pretty unsightly conditions, as you can imagine here. This is just at the start of this project, which continued for almost a full year with the rehabilitation of the park, for example. The point being is that those impacts are short, and they are very easily to address, even when things look as bad as what you see here. So I talked before about all these different things, these different stressors that dams impact our rivers with. And so those are pretty substantial. They've been there for, in many cases, 200 years or more, because our dams in Massachusetts typically date to, in some form or another, to the Industrial Revolution. However, the response that we see, but from removing the dam, just in terms of even hours or days, the channel, because the river is such a dynamic environment, the channel and the vegetation and the fish and wildlife that use that channel immediately begin to repair themselves, regardless of the approach taken for that dam removal. And so what you see is that, I mean, we've removed dams and seen eel and seen other fish swimming up through the work site while the machines are still working. You see that sediment moving. You see the channel forming new riffles that haven't been exposed, new habitat that hasn't been exposed for hundreds of years within days. Following that, as you'll see in a minute, the vegetation resprouting, the channel forming around the constraints that we've placed on it for safety and other reasons. And over the course of the following months to 2 years or so, that channel widening and adapting, sandbars forming, getting moved out, all the things that you associate with a typical healthy dynamic river. So I want to show you a few slides of what I'm talking about. This is from a relatively tiny dam out in Lancaster, which is just north of Worcester. A really cool site on a beautiful brook called Weeki Peaky Brook. It's a cold water fishery. That means this has native regenerating brook trout and other cold water species, not stocked, but a really important resource, especially when we think about climate change. Streams like this being so imperiled by the changing climate. So here's the dam. This was at a park at a local conservation area right off of the main road here. And this is what was left, you know, the remnants of our industrial heritage. And here's what it looked like removing the dam. Again, much smaller than the Charles River, so bear with me. You can see that the contractor has used those pipes there to divert the flow. That way they can get the machines in there safely and remove the material of the dam. So that's sort of the bomb going off kind of scenario here out at Weeki Peaky Brook. This is in 2015, I think. And here's what it looks like on the day the machines are pulling out. Still not a very pleasing sight, I guess you could say. The dam is gone, obviously, and you can see the channel kind of forming through the mud and sediment that is built up behind it. So this is literally the day, you know, they're kind of grading back and stabilizing the slopes. 3 months later, that was in spring. Here we have toward the end of summer. All of the vegetation that you see in that former impoundment is native seed bank that is not planted, not seeded. The side slopes that you see were seeded. You can see those are kind of struggling to come in on that one side. We have some stakes for other shrubbier plants, but all that impoundment, as I said before, within weeks to months, we're seeing that regenerating. And here's what it looked like 3 years later. If you go to the site today, you can see a thriving wetland with lots of native vegetation. There are some invasive species, plant species that the town does try to manage and work to fight back as budget allows, but overall a thriving and very healthy site. I want to touch briefly on the carbon benefits because I was so happy to hear that people are thinking about that here in Natick. It's true that large bodies of water typically are net emitters of greenhouse gases like methane. What I'm trying to show in this image is that with the removal of this dam, theoretically, what we'd see is that this impounded area upstream would narrow somewhat. The folks who came out to the Shawshene River saw that, and actually somebody was speaking about it earlier, how you could see the dimensions of the former impoundment, and then you could see where the river typically flows now. So this is a totally idealized polygon. This green shape I put in here is theoretically an idea of where the former riverbed or the former impoundment bed would be dewatered once the river were to return to its natural shape if the dam were removed. And I don't know if this is correct. This is just a conceptual idea. And the point I'm making here is that whatever land that reverts to riparian wetland is no longer producing methane. And in fact, it's a place where vegetation can become established and thereby take up carbon dioxide. So there's some science behind this in terms of the methane production of reservoirs, but obviously we all know that plants are net, provide opportunities to take up carbon dioxide. So I wanted to throw that out there. Dr. Roy might have some other thoughts on that from her work. The big question everybody has, what is it going to look like after? The short answer is that impounded area will look much like the river does upstream and downstream. It's going to be a little bit narrower. It might be moving just a little bit faster. There might be rockier or rifflier areas depending on the gradient and depending on the amount of water at any given time. And the banks will be a little more vegetated. And what the river will do is it'll expand and contract with higher flows, just like you see upstream and downstream. Here's a site for those of you who couldn't join us in Andover. This is at the Marlin Place Dam on the Shawshene River. Here we're looking downstream, and the dam used to cut across right between these two buildings. I used this slide to show you, here's me with a group of my colleagues a couple of years back, kind of checking out the area. And what you do see is some Japanese knotweed in the area. Basically, the message I'm trying to share here is that with almost all of our rivers and streams, whether there's a dam or not, invasive species like knotweed, purple loosestrife, and others are already present. Unless there's a concerted and consistent effort to maintain and remove those plants from the work area or from adjacent areas for as long as need be, there basically will always be those invasive species. And so that's really important in terms of developing a very strong, robust planting plan to encourage and give those both native and planted materials, native species a jump start to be able to avoid or forestall invasion, as well as a commitment from the owner and from the community to do some kind of management against that. Here's that site I mentioned before. There is some, if you look further upstream in that impoundment, out in Lancaster, we did have some invasive species. So I think I've gone over my time. I've tried to cover a lot, so I hope you'll apologize for me not going too into depth. But I'm gonna stop sharing here and look forward to answering questions that folks might have later.
Thank you so much, Nick. I think we should have Allison give her presentation, and then the committee can ask questions of whichever of you the question should most appropriately go, if that's okay.
Sure.
Great. Allison Roy, you are up for the second presentation of the evening.
Great, thanks, Ona. And you can see the slides here?
We can, they look good.
Great, thanks. So thank you guys all for having me here and for your interest in understanding what sort of ecological things to consider with removing a dam or keeping a dam in place and adding fish passage. As Ona said, my name is Allison Roy. I am a federal scientist with the Geological Survey, but don't be afraid, I'm not going to be talking about geology. I'm actually in the ecosystem side of the USGS and part of something called the Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit. So I am based in Massachusetts, and my focal area is Massachusetts, and I work closely with cooperators in Massachusetts to conduct research with graduate students to meet the needs of our state cooperators. I work with nonprofits and all over. So I'm based at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I put my email nice and big here just really to let you know I'm happy to answer any questions both tonight and in the future as they're relevant here. I am a freshwater ecologist. I've been studying streams for over 20 years. In Massachusetts, I've been here for nearly 10 years and working on streams and lakes and issues of relevance here. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the research that I've been doing on dams and dam removal, and that work has been done through work with some graduate students. So I had a master's student who started in 2015, 2016, and he studied the impacts of dams, and I have a current PhD student who's looking at the responses to dam removal. And these projects have been funded by a variety of entities, but I will just definitely acknowledge right now that the Division of Ecological Restoration was instrumental. They funded a big part of this project and helped acquire other funds to do this. And their interest, if I can speak for them with Nick in the room, was really to try to quantify some of the responses, the effects of dams and responses to dam removal. There, as Nick pointed out, there are over 3,000 dams in Massachusetts. We can't study every single one of them, but if we do a sampling of them across a range of different conditions, maybe that can tell us a little bit about what you would expect. So the bad news tonight is that we don't have, well, we're not studying your dam, and we had one dam in the Charles River, but that's way upstream, the old mill, so it's not actually that representative of what you have, but hopefully by looking across what we have been studying, you can get a sense, and you might trust me that we can infer what might happen at this site, and we can think about them from a stream ecological perspective as well. And so that's where I wanted to start. just with the physics behind impoundments versus free-flowing rivers. Nick gave you a view of the stream that was kind of on the side, and so here's your drone or bird's eye view of a stream that when you add an impoundment, you of course back up the water behind, you add a dam, you back up the water behind it, creating this larger area, an impoundment or a lake or whatever somebody wants to call it, a reservoir, but it, it is backed up and wider than the stream downstream of it, and where it's narrowed upstream. And this is, a typical impoundment behind a small dam. So by having a dam in place, the impoundment compared to the free-flowing river has a larger surface area. The flow is slower, right? In ponded areas, it's not as fast moving, which means that the water is staying in that ponded area for longer than it would if it was a free-flowing river. And that open area is also, more area exposed to sun because it's a wider area. So as a result of all of these things, we expect, and I will show you soon to see, increases in temperatures in these impounded areas. And then we also see reduced dissolved oxygen. Nick mentioned dissolved oxygen. I'll talk about it a little more in a bit. It's a really important characteristic of flowing water, well, actually of all water, because organisms need oxygen for their metabolism. But when you increase temperatures, warmer temperatures can't hold as much oxygen. So you will naturally see that sort of relationship of reduced dissolved oxygen. And this is not just in that impounded area. So if we go back to the view that Nick gave us and sort of with the water flowing from left to right here, if you were to look at temperature way upstream of the dam where it's still like a free-flowing river, if you theoretically, this is just an example, have close to 15, 16 degrees Celsius temperature, in the impoundment, it might jump up, right? That's the second dot here behind the dam. But it doesn't go right back down, just downstream of the dam. In fact, so these dams have surface spillage, and so that warm water is there, and it's not until its other tributaries come in or other, runoff from the side and the shade that it can cool downstream of the dam. And so we talk about a footprint that the dam creates. So it's not just the impoundment that has impacts, but a footprint downstream. So I'm going to show you this in a little bit of data. This is a figure that shows some of the sites that we investigated over the course of several years by putting these little loggers in streams and around dams. We put them upstream of the impoundment, in the impoundment, and downstream at different distances. But here I'm just showing you data from where that river is upstream. So consider that's what we want to get back to. That's the control there. And then downstream, immediately downstream of the dam. And what I'm plotting here is the downstream warming. So anything above the 0 means it's warmer downstream of the dam than upstream of that impounded area. And I think one of the first things that should jump out at you is that there's a huge range. So these are all sites across the bottom. Every bar is a different site. And there's a huge range in this. This is conditions during August. So in a warm part of the year, there are sites that are over 5 degrees warmer downstream, degrees Celsius warmer. So that's a big in Fahrenheit, right? Downstream compared to the upstream. And then there are sites that are actually even cooler downstream than upstream, a few of them. And there are a handful of sites that you don't see a difference. We in total found of these that I'm comparing here that had that upstream of impoundment comparison, that 2 sites cooled, 5 sites had no difference upstream and downstream, and 11 sites warmed. And those that warmed the most, these over here in the red, were those that were on dams that were on smaller watersheds, that the dam itself was creating a big volume reservoir. And they're typically actually pretty forested. And so it's where the dam is a big impact there, as opposed to sites that are larger rivers, are more open, as the Charles is, right? So again, I don't have data at your site, but one could infer from data like this that you're probably not going to see extreme downstream warming from associated with the dam. You probably don't have that. You could put in loggers and find that out. But you might have some degree of warming that could be tested. I want to point out, just because we are talking about the sites you visited on the Shawsheen River, and I actually think this, while it isn't a good comparison in the slope that you guys were mentioning and the size of the river, it is another urban area. And so Marland and Balmoral were two of our sites that we studied before the dam was removed. And we found this, so this is Mar down here. And BAL. And you can see that Marland Place, there was a slight warming, but not a whole lot in terms of degrees, but it was significant. And Balmoral, there was no difference upstream and downstream of that. So these are sites that we didn't see a big effect here. You know, we can, since this was removed 5 years ago, we can look at what happened afterwards, what has happened. So I'm going to show you the data, the thermal responses to dam removal at those two sites. I've got Balmoral on the left and Marland Place on the right. And our upper pictures are the before dam removal, and the lower should be what it looked like, somewhat what it looked like when you went out to visit, so post removal. And you can see that, so Balmoral, again, there wasn't an effect of warming, and so you really don't see a whole lot of change afterwards. This is each year. If anything, it was a little bit warmer post dam removal in the blue compared to the red, but these are really minor. Look at the scale here. It's like we're 0.1 of a degree Celsius. At Marland Place, you know, so we're still talking less than a degree Celsius, but we went from before dam removal to it being warmer and then cooler following dam removal, and consistently through the last several years. So we are able to see thermal responses even if there are only minor changes beforehand. Now flip over to dissolved oxygen. Briefly mentioned.
Allison, I'm just going to interrupt to do a time check and let you know you're about 10 minutes in. So hopefully sort of getting to the middle.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So dissolved oxygen is really important for aquatic life, as I mentioned, for certain ecosystem processes happen in where there's no oxygen and where there is oxygen. So we're altering ecosystem processes if we don't have the dissolved oxygen typical of river conditions. And this final bullet is related to the fact that in anoxic environments, you can get mercury traveling up to biota because it transforms there. So we also put in dissolved oxygen loggers upstream and downstream and within the impoundment. And these data I'm going to show you are just the comparison between upstream and in the impoundment. And it's a smaller subset of sites, but you still see the same story. So again, to ground you, so the difference you're seeing here is upstream to the impoundment. So if it is below the line, it means there's lower dissolved oxygen in the impoundment. If it's above the line, it's higher dissolved oxygen in the impoundment. So most of the sites had lower dissolved oxygen in the impoundment compared to upstream. And those sites that had the biggest reductions are the sites that did have the highest warming. And I'll just point out Marland and Balmoral in this. So they both saw reduced dissolved oxygen in the impoundment. But after dam removal, we immediately saw within 1 year a recovery of that dissolved oxygen. So no longer were there the reductions in dissolved oxygen. It's closer to this zero line here. And that was both in Balmoral and Marland Place. Just to whet your appetite a little bit. So one of the things that we look at in terms of water quality and what the state DEP looks at in terms of assessing water quality are benthic macroinvertebrates. So the bugs in the stream, and they can be good indicators of the water quality. And so we have also been measuring the bugs in the stream. And this metric I'm showing here is the sensitive bugs and how many of them there are, how many species there are. And the bars we have are upstream, the orange is in the impoundment, and the blue is downstream. And the 2016 is before dam removal, and 2017 is after dam removal. And so what I want you to see is that before dam removal, there were not sensitive species in the impounded area. There were upstream, there were downstream, but not in the impoundment. And then after dam removal, they were similar upstream in the former impoundment area and downstream. So pretty cool. I want to talk about other ecological aspects, not just water quality. One of the things that I know you care about and have seen in the news are cyanobacteria blooms, or otherwise might hear people saying harmful algal blooms. They're not good. These are scary. So why? Because they are toxic, or some of them are toxic, and the toxicity can harm wildlife. They can harm people. Unfortunately, there are stories of pets dying, animals dying, and even humans dying because of exposure to cyanobacteria blooms. They are, when they're there, they're low oxygen environments. As I said, the wildlife can die, fish can die, and they're an indicator of degraded water quality. Not to mention, they don't look that good, they smell, and to actually deal with them is a big cost. So this is one of a big concern in freshwater ecology in general, but in the Charles too. And these are data I got from the Charles River Watershed Association that show how much blooms are happening in the lower Charles Basin. And this is from 2005 to 2020. And you can see that the durations were not that long. And then these bars are getting longer and longer. And of course, there's year-to-year variation, but there's basically more blooms happening now than used to be, which is why everybody is a little bit up in arms and scared about it for good reason. How does this relate to dams? Well, the things that influence algal blooms are also the things that are increased in impounded areas. So things like nutrients, especially phosphorus that is bound to sediment, that it gets trapped behind dams. So those are very nutrient rich environments and impoundments, which is why they're more potential for bacteria blooms. The warmer temperatures also increase the risk of blooms, and then the lower flows mean that you don't have the flushing out of those nutrients and others. So basically that you can grow these algae. So big concern, and certainly one that is an issue there. I know you're interested in fishes. I love to talk about fishes. The fish story here we're hoping was going to be presented by Becca Quinones from Mass Wildlife. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be here, and so I'll do my best to represent the data that Mass Wildlife have. In general, the quick story that Nick already presented is that, you have a dam, we know that that decreases movement, and especially of migratory fishes. I just showed you data about increases in temperature, which can affect fishes, decreases in dissolved oxygen. We just talked about fish kills. There's also the differences in hydrology. So different fish require flowing water. And so the flow rates will affect what fishes you find. And then the nutrients also influence fishes. And so the result is, when you have a dam, we tend to have more warm water fish, more fish that like lake environments, not fluvial fish. We have lower diversity of fishes because you don't have the variety of habitats that you have beforehand, and as a result have more this homogenization, so more of the similar types of organisms. There are also more species, more non-native species that are these warm water lake fish, like largemouth bass. So that is one concern related to dams. So what's up with the Charles River? So in the Charles River near this dam, there are 15 species of fishes in there. The data from Mass Wildlife showed that there are similar species upstream and downstream of the dam. Hasn't changed a whole lot over the period of time where they have some records of fishes there. Most of these fishes in this list are warm water fishes that are those lake dwelling fishes, what we would expect, right, with a slow moving river, but also with a dam river. Importantly, the migratory fishes that a lot of people you might hear in the news, so those the anadromous fishes that go out to the ocean, they aren't here in this section. There are no shad, no American shad, and no river herring here. They're blocked. The shad are really blocked at the Watertown Dam right near the base of the Charles River, and the river herring, well, they can pass that. They can't pass all the dams up to where we are. There are trout in the river, but they're there because they're stocked in the springtime each year. And so they're there for a short period of time. So with dam removal, given that population, we might expect that you would see changes in migrations, but only for a few species that are moving a lot. So we point out a couple of species. So American eel are another anadromous species that spend most of their life in the streams and then spawn out in the ocean. And so you can see increased movement of American eel potentially with dam removal, and white suckers that move a lot within the river basin. We would expect more species that need flowing water. And we'd expect that those stock trout would stick around longer because of the lower temperatures and just reduced competition because of the open area. I want to point out that the story is not, though, just in the main stem of the river. By opening, so here's the dam that you're talking about here. There's a huge section of the Charles River that's undammed upstream of it, which is really cool. And so opening it would increase even more connectivity of the large section of river. But there's still dams on the main stem, and I think that's a point that probably some of you have thought about a lot. It's like, well, how much better could it get? There's still dams on the main stem. That's true. But a dam, so it also can help with the connectivity between the smaller streams, those tributary streams. So I'll just blow this up a little bit. And so you can imagine if you take out this dam, then these tributary streams down here that might have trout, well, maybe they could, native trout, could actually pass through the main stem and disperse to tributaries here. So not that they would be found in the main stem regularly, but that they could have connectivity. So that's an important point. Sorry, we're getting there, Ona. This is a question we just wanted to address because it was a question that was brought up, and because I know this is one of the other options you're considering is fish passage. So can fish passage help address these dam impacts? So fish ladders are common on dams, and they're commonly put on dams where you can't remove them. And here's one on the Charles River Dam. So I think it's important to acknowledge that they can allow some species to move upstream. And just as I pointed out, like those river herring that can pass the Watertown Dam, they get 300,000 through there. Now, a lot more would move up if there wasn't a dam, but they can pass. But still, many will be blocked in the process of finding a ladder. They get like in clusters like this, and so there can be increased predation and stress on the fishes. And then again, there are some species that can't make it all the way up and don't operate through these ladders. And in this case, there aren't ladders all the way up to make it. And then I just wanted, since the beginning was talking about water quality, that point out that fish ladders I don't think it would do anything to the water quality impacts that you might see. And it won't affect the sediment transport. And so likely the bloom issue behind the dam would still be an issue. I don't see how the fish ladder could help that. Because you're not changing the habitat, you would not actually restore the assemblages themselves. Fish ladders are very targeted for certain fish to move through, and that's it. So this is my last slide, and again to mention climate, because and Nick brought up the methane release and impoundments, but I wanted to just take this temperature perspective. So with changing climates, we do expect, over the next decades that we will see increases in temperature and altered precipitation patterns and more floods. And as a result, we're going to have, just like the data show over the last, since 2005, we're going to see more algal blooms. We're going to see fewer species that can survive in areas, so that they will be contracted habitat that they have in shifts where they might have to move to areas that are cooler. And I think there are probably a whole lot more, some that we know about and some that we don't know about, of what the kind of effects of these changing climates are. The point about dams and dam removal is that free-flowing rivers are just by nature more resilient to disturbances. So whether it's climate changes or other disturbances, urbanization, development, if the river is free-flowing, then the organisms and the processes that happen in them, they're more able to be resilient to climate. So yeah, so I just want to end with that, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you to both of you. Committee members, that was a lot. We wanted to hear it. Now we've heard it, and I'm sure you have additional questions or things you want clarified, or the floor is really open. We have about a half an hour to have some discussion. Go ahead, Becca.
So I'll admit I don't remember if we closed the loop on this, but I know there was the stink that was coming from the river. There were fish kills, and I'm curious again, going back to this idea of when we think of quality of life and enjoying this natural space of the dam, if we know that rising temperatures are going to be potentially causing more fish kills, is that a jump that we can make, that we could expect that this sort of stinky river could happen more frequently with more increased fish kills?
Thanks for
Yeah,
so Nick and Allison, yeah, just chime in. Good.
Again, Nick, you can add whatever you want. I'll take a start at this one. So we can say with confidence that warmer temperatures do result in more growth of algae and the plants that Nick was talking about in the stream. When those die, you get low oxygen. When you get low oxygen, you get fish kills. There are lots of other things that cause fish kills, but that is one mechanism of getting a fish kill. So I think we can say with pretty good confidence that, you know, we're already at a point that you can get really low oxygen areas and see fish kills. The odor piece, some of that is from anoxic environments. So when you don't have oxygen or hypoxic environments, it can smell bad, right? And you might see that associated again with these blooms. So that you got all this algae, they're actually cyanobacteria that bloom to the surface, but then they die. And when they die, they fall down. And when they fall down into the bottom of the impoundment or the river, wherever it is, then there are all these microbes that eat it up. And those microbes take up oxygen. And so that's what creates the really anoxic environment, is the dying off of all of this stuff that happens, you know, it can happen throughout the summer. It certainly happens at the end of the summer when you see these.
Thank you. What else? And committee members, as always, also feel free to just reflect on what you've heard, like what sticks out at you. Kristen, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It's been great. I was just looking for a little bit of clarity on the fish runs and any potential restoration of that. So you mentioned that there are some dams, I think, at the mouth of the river or downriver. Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what are the chances of restoring? You mentioned that some of the migrating fish can jump the ladders, but that there are no fish in that area. So I just didn't get clarity on whether there's any potential of bringing the fish back.
Yeah, I can speak to that really briefly. I know that there are a number of folks who are looking at improvements to the dams downstream. Our sister division, called the Division of Marine Fisheries, is the one that's responsible for managing sea-run species like river herring and American eels. And, you know, they work as closely as they can with DCR, who manages the Charles River Dam down at Charlestown, to improve passage there. If you go down there at certain times in the spring, it smells pretty bad because there are a lot of dead herring stuck in the ladder there. And what we see is even on rivers with a number of dams that have ladders, there's a diminishing return. Even if as functioning as well as they can, the number of fish that pass each ladder diminishes as you go upstream, which maybe stands to reason. So while according to the information that we got from Mass Wildlife that Allison showed, you know, there aren't these numbers of these anadromous species in the vicinity of the South Natick Dam, it is reasonable to think that if improvements to passage at those other dams, Moody Street, et cetera, downstream, were to happen, it could be that we start to see more of those fish up in this part of Natick. But there's no way to count on that.
Thanks. Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, and thanks, Nick and Allison. It was good information. I guess I was hoping for maybe a little bit more specificity on this particular site. Maybe down the road, it makes sense to, I know Allison said she's not looking at it with her people at UMass, but maybe that's something that we should suggest happens, that we do a study to see what the water temperatures are, what the oxygen levels are, what the bugs are in the impoundment, and how it might change. But that being said, I wonder if you could give an opinion. There is a valve that isn't working in the spillway. If that was repaired, would some kind of management of that valve and opening it, would it mitigate any effects of the warming of the impoundment and the negative ecological effects? Is there enough that the valve could do to help with that as we go forward? If, for instance, if we repair the dam rather than remove the spillway, is that something that if the town had that as an option to help down the line? I'd like to get your opinions on that.
Start, Nick.
Just to kick off, I guess it's possible. It would really depend how much water could be let through that valve and at what times of the year. That would be something I think that could be estimated by GZA or by engineers, what that effect might be. And Alison, I'll let you talk about the fish aspect and the temperature aspect relative to your research.
I guess the first question or thing I would look at is how deep that valve is and whether this impoundment stratifies. So if the impoundment is really warmer up top and cooler down, and there's cooler water down, then releasing a lot of cooler water down can actually resolve that. So actually in giant dams out west, you can see the opposite. You can see colder streams downstream of dams because of the low release and the colder. And actually, so we have an example in Massachusetts. So the Quabbin and the Swift River downstream of it, if any of you know that, is a cold water downstream now. That isn't what would normally be there either. So so it really depends on where that would be. And then just going back to your thought about is it worth getting some data on it. I think the just knowing that the temperature effects, that is a cheap thing, very cheap thing to do. You'd still have to put in loggers. You can't just put a thermometer in because that changes every time. But you'd put in a logger and you could leave it for a short-term deployment upstream and impoundment downstream, and you could quickly see, is there an effect on temperature? Dissolved oxygen's a little bit harder and a little bit more expensive, but it's still a logger that you can put in, and it kind of goes up there for more intensive studies from there. So there are some pretty quick things that you can do to see how much of an effect it is. I think I would just charge you to answer the question for yourself of how much does that answer affect your decision, right? And I think, if it does, then there's a good reason to do it. If it doesn't, then information doesn't help.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with that. I think there's a lot of questions that we have that are getting kind of good theoretical from very educated people answered, but not specific to this site. And I think that's one of them. So I think the more we can get in that regard, even engineering questions about what the river looks like underneath the impoundment, where the deep parts are, where maybe the land would be exposed. Would it be on both sides or would it be on one? Historically that embankment area wasn't there. So where did the river go historically? Did that push it over north or not? And so there's a lot of those things I think could be answered with some studies. And to earlier question about kind of where this dam falls in context to the other dams in the river. I loved, that one graphic you showed where all the tributaries and how much habitat removing this dam would affect. But I'd like to know, I think a lot of people are interested in, all those dams. I think there's 9 of them or so from the mouth up to this river. Where are they in relation to what's the possibility that maybe those could be breached or improved with another fish ladder or different technologies? I think that does kind of go, as we're looking at this point in time and what to do with this dam, it could make a difference if there was a momentum to, hey, we could get herring and things up to this area. Certainly, it may change people's minds. So, but I appreciate both your inputs. It was great.
Thank you, Mike. I see Janine and then David Blees and then MK. Janine. You're
I would
muted.
just need to mute. There we
Thank
go.
you. Thank you for the presentations. They were excellent and I appreciate the insight. My question is about the fish ladder, for instance, about the dam generally, the spillway. Could that not be designed so that fish could swim up the whole thing? It could look more like steps so that it could have the low cold water release valve. I mean, is this not an engineering problem that could be solved without eliminating the feature that is so appreciated there in our town center?
If what you're talking about would be a ramp of some kind on the downstream side of the dam, is that what you're
More
envisioning?
like steps. If the whole thing were a stepped thing that the fish could swim up, that they would sort of recognize as a rocky transition.
Yeah, treatments like that are sometimes called nature-like fishways, or they're called rock ramps. Just like, you know, and those are those have been used. They've been used a lot in Europe and in some parts of the U.S. as well. And just like with a typical narrow fish ladder that you're more used to seeing, my understanding is that they work well for some species some of the time, and not all species all the time, or they're only as good as the design is relative to the hydraulics that are happening at a given point. And that becomes challenging sometimes, especially when, as we would be now, looking to pass, you know, the interest we have here is not for river herring, which it's for other fish that are coming in from the tributaries or in the main stem. And those are species that, by and large, there isn't very good or as good data on their swim speeds and durations. So this is something that would have to be engineered, it'd have to be built, and then it would have to be maintained. If storms or other things impacted that, you'd lose that efficiency, most likely. So that's an additional prolonged cost to the town to do that. Furthermore, it does nothing to change the water quality or flow characteristics upstream and the habitat and the dissolved oxygen that you have upstream of the dam, because you're maintaining that dam elevation. You're simply creating a stepped or other rocky thing downstream. So it doesn't, for those of you who are interested in reducing liability and responsibility and maintenance costs for the long term, it's counter to that and basically would only serve to pass some fish some of the time.
Thanks, Janine. Can we go to David and then MK and then Dirk? David, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is regarding the nature of the impoundment area post removal, where we expect it to turn into a wetland or a marsh. What do we expect in terms of mosquito population? I mean, is it going to increase? Will there be other species like dragonflies, which will also increase, which will keep the mosquitoes down? What would be the what would we expect to see? And a second question: will I be able to get my kayak across the new wetland from, you know, where the river is at the edge of my property now to where the river goes to, or will I need some sort of wooden walkway or something? Will it be too marshy? Yeah, thank you.
I'll start off, Alison, you can chime in. I think based on the long linear nature of this impoundment, as we saw at Marlin Place in Andover, my personal guess is that I don't anticipate much change in your mosquito population. I will say though that the state's mosquito control districts relatively breach small dams and other berms to increase flushing to reduce wetness. So, but obviously you know, having a flowing river that has fish that could, and other wildlife that eat those larvae, you know, there's a trade-off there. And my guess is that it's really hard to estimate that.
Okay.
As far as access to the water, getting your kayak from dry land into the water, I think that would really depend on the location of where you are, and to the gentleman's comment before, where the restored channel was predicted to set up. So that, in other words, if your home is on the left bank looking downstream and the channel is going to be somewhat far away, it might be that.
That's exactly where it.
Okay, great. So my guess is that, especially immediately after dam removal, there will be a period of time in which getting from point A to point B is probably more difficult. But it really depends on how rocky the substrate is. You probably don't have a lot of sediment accumulated there. And so it might be that in a very short order, after a couple higher flows, that finer yucky material flushes out and you have a more better gravel substrate. Allison, have you ever encountered people talking about mosquitoes or other things like that?
Yes, but often not in these situations. So I've studied lots of things that people care about mosquitoes, like rain barrels. But, you know, I think your answer was like an ecologist, Nick. And David, it sounds like you've already thought about this too. They're predators, right? There are dragonflies, there are fishes in this area. And so you tend to have more mosquito areas when you have wetlands that don't have fishes. And so it's hard to know. It's always hard to know exactly what it's going to be like, but most likely that the system will take care of itself, and you would have less of an issue of anything.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks for the presentations.
Thank you. MK, you are up.
Thank you. I actually have a question for Allison. Did I see correctly on the slides that temperature differential was measured in August?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so that would be low flow conditions, so that would probably be the most extreme you would see.
Right, and the warmest air temperatures, right? So water temperature reflected. Yeah, exactly. So this is the worst. It's exactly why we focused on, yeah.
So I'm in the interest of kind of pursuing this angle of, you know, would additional information help us have the confidence to make a decision? Would you know, having temperature monitors put in say the springtime not really give us the results we want until August? Is this a conversation that, you know, would be a study over the course of a year, and then we'd get information and then have to make a decision? I'm kind of just trying to understand, you know, what the time frame would be for gathering the additional site specific information.
No, that's pretty perceptive of you. So yes, so we do leave our loggers in year round, and I can show and I can share just so you have a sense of this, of where you see the effects and what the effects are in the winter time too. And I think it is important from an ecological perspective year round, but if you just want to see if there is warming and how much warming there is, the worst of it, then absolutely, yeah, it's the summer that you want to leave it in. And we pretty much honed it in. Like you could do, yeah, a week in August and you'd get your answer if that's what you want to see, how much warming there is. A little longer period of time is nice. We do our stuff for multiple years because we know there are warm years and cold years, but I don't think that's necessarily what you need, because you're not really trying to see what the response is in the same way. You just want to see is there an effect? Is there a temperature effect with the dam in there? If there isn't an effect right now, then removing the dam is not going to do anything to the temperature.
Right. Yeah. Just to play my hand a little bit, I think, you know, it seems like the site-specific information about temperature would be helpful, but generally speaking, you know, an engineered system is never going to function as well as a natural system in terms of regulating temperature and dissolved oxygen. So, you know, we could get more information, but, you know, it would be a scale of degrees, right? Am I kind of understand?
Yeah.
Likely would it be a scale of degrees rather than, you know, a wide difference in answer?
Right. So two things. One, you know, degrees do matter when you're at organisms that are at their sensitivity levels. So, you know, coupled again, I know that sometimes it's like, what kind of global warming do we have? It's only a couple degrees.
Yeah, and just to be clear,
degrees do matter.
I don't want to mischaracterize my statement. When I say a matter of degrees, I don't necessarily mean temperature degrees, just like it would be a small change within a range, not necessarily a huge difference.
Sorry, my bad on interpreting that. The other thing is, one of the things that I was thought of, like, that we could try to kind of figure out if there was an effect here, is try to see some, so there are USGS gauges in the Charles River. Some of them have temperatures. There might be some other, the Charles River Watershed Association has some sites, and some of them are in impoundments and like you could look at that. They're not directly next to impoundments, but there might be able to get some inference from some main stem. I did go to them, and they didn't, they're like, well, you could look at some of these other ones. I don't know that you would really get the answer of what it would be like there, but that is some data that you could look into. And my group is actually studying dissolved carbon in the Charles River now. So I have 100 sites all over the area. So hopefully we'll have some data soon, but just not specific at this spot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, MK. We have about 10 more minutes. I have Dirk and then Becca, and then would love to invite any committee members who haven't had a chance to share thoughts or ask questions to share anything on your mind if you're so moved. So Dirk and then Becca.
Thank you. I'm interested in this thought of collecting site-specific data. And I'm trying to tease out some of the threads I've heard in discussion of that topic so far. Is it the case? It seems to be the case that there are a number of sites where, even if we were not able to wait to get next August data, if we were to take, say, November to May data or something like that at our site, it seems like it's the case that there would be some number of sites where we'd have comparison data for other sites. Is that the fact?
Yes, we do have other sites in that time period. If you're thinking that, then you could infer, well, what their difference is between winter and summer. And the challenge is that we have such this gradient of other sites, so it's hard to know what that shift would be.
Of course. Well, the reason I asked the question, and I'll, I guess, tip my hand. I am interested in more data, and I can look at just the morphology of the river there, and the metrics and the forms of the banks and the trees and so forth, and have some rough idea intuitively what profile that would generate in terms of the key dimensions we've been talking about: the temperature, the dissolved oxygen. But I'm not sure how I would convey that intuitive sense, looking at all of that. I think to have some data to refer to, taken right out of the water, would make me more confident that I could describe a piece of what I consider to be a significant piece of the decision process to my neighbors and fellow residents of Natick. And I think as a committee, we need to think about being prepared to do that.
Thank you, Dirk. Becca, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm going to put a counterpoint to that. I feel like, from my understanding, and I'm going back to Allison, one of the first things you said around like acknowledging that this isn't the river that you've studied, but you've studied many, many rivers and many, many dams, and this is your career. And, you can infer from that based on these trends. And I think, my concern is to say, oh, we need to wait until August so we can test this in August. Well, if we had done that this August, the water level was so high that wouldn't have borne anything out. Like this is a natural flow. This is nature. You can't take just this one piece, but I think you can infer based on scientific data. I mean, I trust science. That's who I am. And so I trust that we can understand the challenges and the problems and infer from that. We might not have the data specifically for our river, but going back again to what Allison said, what do we need to know for that? We know dissolved oxygen is a problem. Yes, temperature is a problem too, but I'm more concerned about the dissolved oxygen. And to that point, I think the ecosystem benefit of having, you know, the data around in an impoundment area, you don't have as many sensitive species. That's a concern. If we're concerned about fish getting up the ladder, but there's no food up there for them because there's no sensitive species, or we're concerned about mosquitoes, but there's no low down on the food chain, you know, those, I think those are the concerns that we need to look at. And I think the last piece that you said around free flowing rivers are more resilient. We need to be moving into an area where we are resilient to what's coming our way. And so that's my perspective. And I think I'm worried that we're going down this over analysis to get things just specific to Natick, when I think we can infer a little bit more.
Thank you, Becca. Martin, final comment and or question for this period.
Well, thank you, both of you. I found this quite enlightening because a lot of specifics, and previously I had only heard generalities. So this was great. And I agree with the site-specific data that is, I think, would also be useful. But I guess this is, I don't know if this can be answered simply, but I'm not sure the numbers are going to mean a whole lot to me. And I sort of want some guidance as to how to know when something is really alarming and when it's going to be a significant problem, when what we have is a significant problem, and when changing it would be a significant benefit, because we have to evaluate the ecological benefits from dam removal with perhaps some benefits of keeping the dam. So how do we quantify all this, or is that not possible?
It's a great final question, Martin. I think Nick or Allison, kind of what do you see, or what do you take at the highest level about the situation you see here related to ecological pieces, and sort of how would you translate that for the committee and the public?
Yeah, so Martin, asking about significance to a scientist is probably not the way you want to go. Significance is about what matters to you. I can tell you whether there's a statistical difference, but the temperature is only this big. Who cares, right? So I hope that you think about what matters to you and the things that matter to you. So I was looking at this with fresh eyes. I've met a couple of times with a subset of this group just to kind of get a sense of this, but I admit I don't know this place. But what I saw was the biggest concerns were cyanobacteria blooms and the risk of that and the concerns about that and the low oxygen there. It's still going to be a big river system that's slow moving. You're not going to have, as I said, you're not going to have trout if you were to remove a dam, right? It's not going to be, completely different, but there are certain things that are right on the edge right now that you could, see effects that are significant in terms of the quality of that section, the quality of life, and then certainly, you would care about if your river was to be a degraded reach, as evaluated by the DEP, and the bugs that are in there, that would be a concern. And I think, you're on the line, and the question is, what happens in future years as things change. Those are the biggest things that I would be concerned about, because again, like, your dam removal isn't going to get river herring up here at this point. The future maybe, but not now. That's not what I would be focused on.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah. Nick.
Just to jump off of that, the one useful, and I'm sure people have done this, but one useful exercise would be to turn that question on its head and kind of taking the next step from what Allison was saying is that it might be useful to think about what do we lose by removing the dam. And in everything I saw on the fish species list that we got from Becca Quinones, Mass Wildlife, those are fish that are still going to be there. It's just that you've opened up the opportunity for potential benefits and transfers from those tributaries and those kind of things. From an ecological standpoint, going out and taking a year's worth of temperature data, honestly, and this is speaking as not a scientist, I don't know what that would get me if I were making the decision on this. I would be thinking more about what do I lose by removing this dam? I understand that there's a question, if the dam stays, the trees have to go, and I completely get why people are concerned about that, given the number and the size of those trees that they're talking about. If I would encourage folks to think about, and this is different for everybody, is what would you lose by having even an incremental benefit in water temperature? If it's one less, algae bloom every 5 years, blue-green algae, or hey, it doesn't smell as bad, 20, 30 days out of the year. Those kind of incremental things to think about from the perspective of, hey, the town of Natick is being faced with an opportunity here to do something that is going to be a large change to many of our eyes. What does that mean for future generations of Natick, of the state, of this area, given those relatively modest changes that might happen to some of these parameters?
Thank you, Nick. I want to ask anybody who's on the phone want to chime in, and you can do star 6 to unmute. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, this is Aaron. Thanks. I'm kind of a finance guy with my background, so every time I hear people with different ideas, I kind of see the dollar signs that go along with those ideas. And I guess my general question, which is kind of tangentially related to everything, is does the town, have they provided us how much money we have to make a decision one way or the other on this? I mean, I can't imagine that we have an unlimited budget to address, the dam situation. So is there, some things that are just not possible because Natick as a town just does not have the money to do some of these grandiose ideas that, would be great, but maybe we don't have the money to do.
Aaron, I think I can confidently say we have not seen that number or heard that number. So we can take that back as a suggestion as you think about where you want more information or to explore more ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
David or Jillian or Seth, anybody who hasn't, I'm probably not catching everybody who hasn't had a chance to weigh in, have anything before we wrap up and take a break? Oh, Claire, great, go ahead, Claire.
I just wanted to raise one point, and I did have to step out briefly to use the restroom, so this may have already been asked. Allison, in your past research, have you done any sort of poking about in the impacts on dam removal on the tributaries to these sort of larger riverine systems? And is there any sort of changes that we see in the health of the tributaries that are contributing to the Charles with this sort of type of dam removal?
Yeah, so I don't have any sites, as I mentioned before, that are as big as this, so it's a little bit hard. Some of the work that I described is very much in this location, but I've got other projects. So I study river herring, for example, and we've been following the dam removals in the Taunton and the recovery into the ponds upstream. And so we see changes in those tributary streams and in the headwater ponds of those fishes. It really depends on what it is. I've also studied freshwater mussels upstream and downstream of dams into different distances, and especially since they require fishes as hosts, like we have expectations of them being able to disperse farther distances with dam removals, but we're that takes a little bit longer to kind of see those sort of effects. So little glimpses and more on the fish side to see that with river herring. Sorry, I just realized so DMF and those same Taunton sites, they've studied eels, and so they've seen recovery of eels following the dam removals as well.
I just want to thank you. The conservation agent, just want to remind folks that riverine and ecological wetland systems aren't just, it's not just the Charles. There's all these other systems that are attached to it that we want to think about as well.
Thanks, Claire. Terry, final thoughts, and then we're going to take a break. You're muted.
Yep, thank you. I just wanted to echo the points that Becca was making about, respecting the data that's been gathered from other examples. It's not simply anecdotal, but it's, I would take that to be a scientific sampling. So while I can see it may be helpful and precise to go into depth specifically on this site, what I feel like I'm taking away from the data collection is that there is a pattern. The exact degree of temperature change may be different and variable, but it seems like there are kind of a core set of behaviors or outcomes that have been demonstrated in some of the studies to date, whether it's on kind of increased water temperatures or frequency of cyanobacteria outbreaks. And so I understand the desire to kind of nail this very precisely, but I would expect to be shocked if anything is going to show a dramatic deviation from some of the numbers that have been developed to date. A side note on, and I understand that this is not about kind of bringing the alewife back this far up in the Charles River in the next 10 years, but I tend to think of things like either dam removal or improvements to fish navigation, and this is the planning board side of me. We'll have a project that comes before us and we require them to put a sidewalk along the street, and someone says, well, but there's no sidewalk connecting on either side. Why do we put a sidewalk here? And the answer is, but in due course, that project is going to be developed and then they will put in a sidewalk, and one sidewalk at a time, we will march our way down the road. And I can point to examples in Natick where we've done just that. This is not construction, but it's a bit of that. What we do here may not have an immediate consequence or impact, although I'm very partial to the alewife. But it is doing something that may, taking a long view, have an impact as decisions are made regarding other dams. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you all. This is the moment when we note that we're extending our meeting 30 minutes longer. We're going to take just a 5-minute break now. Not unexpectedly, we really delved in. So let's come back at 6 minutes past. You can just committee members, just mute yourself, take off your video. And then we're going to start with public comment. So members of the public who would like to talk, be prepared to raise your hand and let us know that in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back. Committee members, as you're back on, if you are able to turn on your video so we know you're there and the public knows you're listening, that's really nice. I know some people are eating and I get it if it doesn't work, but we're happy to see those of you who can. Members of the public, if you would like to give verbal public comment, now's the time. The way to do it is by clicking on that raise hand button, as Roger and Pat have done. And *9 will raise your hand if you're just calling in by phone and would like to speak up. So if you would like to make public comment, I'm going to give people, I don't know, a moment to find that raise hand and click on it if you want to be in the queue. And while I give them that moment, committee members, I do hope you'll take a little time to read through the written comments that were shared with you earlier today. There are a lot of thoughtful points and people who are obviously following along very closely and have good insights and questions. We'll go to Roger and then Pat. Looks like we have 2 people who want to make public comment, and I'll give you each 3 minutes. Roger, go ahead and share your thoughts.
Can you hear me okay?
We can. Welcome.
Thank you.
And
What
can you
I'd like
start
to,
by introducing yourself also?
oh, sure. My name is Roger Scott. I live at 40 Water Street in South Natick. And I appreciate having this opportunity to say something. My question is a new one. So I had a whole bunch of questions I submitted, but listening to Mr. Wildman earlier today, he said on the removal of the dam, the increased river flow would add a rapid-like effect to the river, which be more challenging for canoeing. And being downriver with a lot of young families that live down here, and I know in the past there was a 2 or 3 year old child that drowned in the river further up. Would children be in danger in the neighborhoods downriver due to this potential of a rapidly moving river? Or if they had gone canoeing with a non-expert canoer, that they could jeopardize their life by being in a rapid flowing river. And also I know that there was a big Labrador retriever that drowned in the river. And that should have been on a leash, of course. And I also know that the fire department had to rescue about a 19-year-old kid once with ladders to go across where the river was running high, and he decided to try to surf it, and got caught in a big mess of. He couldn't swim out of it, so the fire department of Natick had to come out and rescue him by ladder. So the fact that it's a calm river now and people enjoy canoeing on it, that would it become dangerous for people to have to deal with the potential of having their children in the neighborhoods under totally watchful eye, and I just want the safety of the children to be considered as well as the enjoyment of the river. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. I'm going to just respond to that, that we are going to talk about recreational use, and why don't we just make sure that we have the safety piece as part of that conversation, because it's going to warrant more than any kind of quick response anyone can name here, and it's obviously really important. Thank you, Roger. Pat, you are up. You should be allowed to speak. I'm having a hard time. Maggie, are you? I'm trying to make that permission work.
Okay. Stop. I'll try to.
Thank you.
I think we're both probably clicking it at the same time.
All right.
Yes, perfect.
Hi,
there you are.
Okay. I'm Pat Palomino. I live on Dover Road on the south side of the river. Now, I heard wonderful information tonight, and I'm very happy to hear about the fish and all the temperatures. But my only concern is with no matter what choice you make, that you make sure that Pleasant Street is open from Route 16 south. It's our only access to Natick without going through other parts of Natick, which takes us all around, or through Wellesley and Needham. It's very important. Did you get it?
We get it. That's excellent. Thank you. And we have one other person who would like to make comment. Jay Lewandowski, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, thank you. I'm Joe Lewandowski. I live on 72 Elliott Street. I am on the high side of the dam. And I've done a little bit of research over the last year, and I've looked online, and I have not found any dam removal examples where they have a pond that is populated with some homes around the high side. I can find a lot that are industrial areas. I can find a lot that are in secluded areas. And I'm asking if you have any examples that you can provide where they have a similar scenic view that Natick has with the pond and the trees and the homes. That's question number one. And question number two, Mr. Blees had asked about if he were to walk over to the river with his kayak, what the Earth would be like. And the answer from the specialist was that he discussed where the channel would be, and the channel would be on the pleasant side of the pond. Well, if they remove the pond and they're engineering a channel, do they have the capability, and would they consider moving the channel outside the natural lay of the riverbed? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all members of the public for listening, and to those of you who shared comments before in writing and now spoken. We really appreciate it. It enriches all of this work and makes sure that the committee can take into account so many important things. I just want to name that in the conversation that the committee had and also in the public comment, various topics have come up that are connected to the subject matter we are going to be tackling in specific upcoming meetings. So we're going to be talking about cultural heritage and legal issues at the next meeting. We're going to be talking about recreational use and community use of the place at the meeting after that. We're going to be talking about financial considerations and risk kind of calculations. I might be forgetting something, but anyway, these topics are all coming up, and we'll pull in some of the questions that have come up and try to elevate those so that we can address them in a useful way. I think I want to just ask, Roger, did you put up your hand again? Let's let you have, I'm going to let you unmute for a moment, and then we're going to shift to next steps.
I did. I'm so sorry, but I did
Go
have
ahead.
one other question. All right, so you're talking about the fish going upstream to go to the other side of where the dam is. Can't you like stock the other side and sort of have fish there from a different means than to have them take that long, tiring trip upstream?
Thank you. I think Jillian has a comment, and then I'm going to take us into next steps, acknowledging it sometimes feels like in public comment, like things got opened and they're not resolved, and I'm not letting you talk about them, and I know that's frustrating. So thanks, everyone. Jillian, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about what the right process will be for answering the questions that were asked. Will we answer them in our next meeting at the start of the meeting, or will we have some of the experts that I feel like the questions were directed to connect with the people who asked the questions? How will we handle it?
Let's think about that, because we have now quite a lot of content that's sort of coming in rolling. Let's the planning team think about what the best tactics are, and they're going to be probably different for different types of comments and questions. Some of them that apply to presentations we've already done might need to go back to GZA versus ones that we just haven't talked about yet. Dirk?
Yes, actually, I was thinking very close to what Jillian was. I certainly don't want to put anybody on the spot for a question that's just arisen that could benefit by taking some time to think through and research and so forth. But one of the questions that was asked about are there dams that have been removed with similar developmental characteristics around the waterway is certainly potentially one well considered by one of the experts we have here today. And I would hope that we might be able to get some response if he's willing to be funneled back to the committee for consideration.
I think that's you, Nick. And I saw a little nod. Was that to this?
Yeah, yeah, I apologize not being able to think of any off the top of my head, or well, not any. I can think of some, and it'd be better for me to take a few minutes and put that in an email to you, Ona, or Jillian, or whomever. And
yep.
It's a great question, though.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. All right, I'm going to move us into next steps. Appreciate so much, all like 40 of you staying this long and this focused and attentive. It's really great. We have many things happening. Oh, thanks. hey, it's a slide. We are preparing, we're finding presenters for presentations on the next few topics, and committee members, you'll see in our quick evaluation form right at the end of this, we'd love any suggestions. And actually members of the public, if you know people who would be good to present on the topics that are coming up, cultural resources and legal considerations, and recreational use and community use in particular. We'd love your suggestions. We are going to get going on figuring out how to plan the adjacent landowners meeting that we've been talking about that hasn't quite happened yet. We expect to be reaching out to a few of our committee members who are upstream and downstream to help us design those conversations. So stay tuned for that. Jillian is working on our next field trip option. Jillian, can I ask you to share what you know about that?
Sure. Just like there was a comment about finding a sample area similar to ours, that's hard for to find necessarily. And so anyway, we're working on finding a dam repair option. We have a couple of potential sites in the works, working with our engineer and also other engineering firms that have done dam removal or dam repair projects. So hopefully that will happen in November. It might need to be on a weekday because we might be reaching out to an engineering firm that we don't have a contract with, and just flagging that for people, but we are working on it.
Thank you. We at CBI will draft the summary again and share that with the committee members. We'll post the approved summaries so members of the public can read those if they don't want to watch the recording. We'll also post the recording of today's meeting. We are going to bring forward into a future conversation the values and principles, again, that we did some brainstorming on earlier, and make sure that we kind of keep lifting those up. And I think there was one other thing I wanted to say that I'm forgetting. Oh, coming back to the timeline at the very beginning that Jamie presented and sort of mentioned around additional work on community input. We think that in late November, around the same time as our community use meeting, thank you, Maggie, we will have some community input session, probably a session, right? Some kind of virtual meeting, and probably also another way to give input online for people who choose not to attend or can't attend a virtual session. And that will be about what people want to see in one or both of the choices. What kind of qualities, what kind of features, what would make each choice as strong and great as it can be, so that as you recommend one or the other, or some kind of modified something, you're incorporating as much of what the community wants as possible. So that is coming up, and we'll give you more information as we get more clarity on what that looks like. Otherwise, I would love to go around quickly and give committee members a chance to share any final thoughts, and then we'll wrap up. I'm also going to ask Maggie if you could put the link to the evaluation form in the chat. We'd ask everybody to take 2 minutes to do that. So I'm going to go alphabetical by last name committee. Mike Balcom and then David Blees. Final thoughts before we adjourn.
Yeah, I thought this was a great meeting. I love the public input portion of it for sure. And just as far as data, I don't want people to get the wrong idea that, you know, looking for specific data on this site is everything. Like we need to know everything about everything. We don't, for sure, but it would instill some confidence as we, you know, either look in this in hindsight on our decision and what we offered. I think generally the science says that there is probably a temperature difference, maybe small, maybe large, and maybe some dissolved oxygen differences because of the mill pond. But I think we can assume that it's, you know, that it's there. But what if it's significant? And that may change people's minds, right? So that may be worth the data collection. Also, this data, or this point in time collecting this data, will perhaps act as a baseline for other projects. I'm thinking downriver. I think if we have the follow-up data as well as the before and after and all that stuff, and we see some success and we see some migrations that are happening and so forth. I know they're doing fish counts up in Andover. Perhaps that gives a little impotence to the Cochrane or the circular dams, these other dams downriver, that makes speed up the process. I mean, I liked Terry's analogy of building a sidewalk to nowhere. I think, you know, having this data is important. So, and if the timeline gets extended for it, I think that should be considered. I think it's more important to get it right. I think it's an iconic and important place to a lot of people in this town. And if we're going to consider the changes that we're considering, that we ought to be confident and do it with, you know, a timeline that's not somewhat arbitrary. I think we have to listen to what's out there. And but again, I thought it was a great meeting, and thanks for everyone who stayed through the whole thing.
Thanks, Mike. David, please, and then Dirk.
Yeah, another good meeting with great information. Yeah, I'm looking forward very much to you know, getting the upstream landowners, abutters together and hearing what my neighbors really think. Thank you.
We'll be in touch. Dirk, and then Jamie.
Dirk, I think you may be muted.
Oh, you're right. I turned my video on. Thank you for bringing the two resources to us today. Their discussion and presentation was very thought-provoking. I just say, for briefness, ditto to everything Mike said about data. I think it's important. I don't think it's the be-all and end-all. It's a piece. It's a significant piece of what we should consider. We've got a lot before us, and I look forward to more well-shaped and well-conducted process.
Thank you. I realize I think Jamie must have had to go. So let's go to Terry and then Janine.
Thank you. I'd say that the organization of this panel and the sessions to follow have been an amazingly effective way of breaking down this large, complicated project into kind of not all of us showing up every time talking about everything, and really being able to drill down on the facets of it. And I think there were a lot of great questions asked and information provided, but just the fact that we could kind of frame today's discussion within those parameters, I find really helpful in terms of advancing our understanding of the issue. And that's it. Thank you. And I'll see some of you in a half hour at the next meeting.
Oh, Janine and then Martin.
It was very beneficial for me to be part of the discussion today. I totally understand what they were getting at about the other aspects of this than the people's use of that space and of the river. So that was a success. Thank you to everyone, and let's keep this going.
Thank you. Martin and then Seth.
Yeah, I agree. Good meeting. I think I sort of summarized my last comment questions last time I spoke, so I'll pass.
Thanks. Seth and then David Lotting.
Sure. I just want to say I really appreciate the experts that presented today and brought their issues and different issues that they presented to the table. I also appreciate the time consideration that this committee and the process is going through to come up with a good community decision. And I think we're moving down that road.
Thank you. David Lodding and then Jeremy.
Yeah, hi, I would agree with what Seth just said. And I think that we have work to do now, clearly, and decide what we consider to be a problem and what isn't. And in the end, we'll have to think about what the practical implications are. Look forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you. Jeremy and then Bill.
Thanks, Ona. I don't have a whole lot to share today. Just echo all of the sentiments that everybody's expressed. And I think, we've really put together as a group a great model for a process such as this. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be a participant and, and actively help the working group behind the scenes, arrange the meetings and kind of guide the process a bit. So it's been a great experience for me. Learned a lot through this, so appreciate it, and look forward to more. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Bill and then Karen.
Thank you. Yeah, just to echo what Seth had said, Nick and Allison don't work for us. They're not consultants, and they gave us their time, and it really gave us some information. So even though they don't really have a dog in the fight, they made sure that our dog was pretty well educated. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate everybody's time sitting here and listening to this, because I do really feel as though as we're drilling down this, we're really getting a better idea of what our decision is going to look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen and then Claire.
Yeah, I appreciate Nick and Allison giving their input. As somebody, obviously, I'm in the recreation and parks, so ecology is very important to me. Nature, everything about nature is very important. The beauty of the area is so important, and I just Nick asked, as far as flipping the question around, it's like, what do we lose? It's a great way to look at it. I mean, what do we lose? That's all I can think about since he said it. I was like, that's a great question.
Thank you. Claire and then MK.
I again echo everybody's thanks to Nick and Allison. It was a great set of presentations. I believe the member of the public is still on, but I did want to just briefly address the fish comment. The fish species that are populating this river are generally species that either need to be in saltwater to live and then freshwater to breed, or vice versa. And so stocking upstream doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because they wouldn't be able to access the habitat that they need for a portion of their life. Thanks to everybody. This has been a great meeting, and I'll see everybody at Open Space who's going to be there.
Thank you. MK and then Aaron.
Yeah, I just want to again thank Nick and Allison. That's very helpful. And Ona and Maggie, I also just want to extend a extra thanks to you for being so adaptable with this process and making tweaks to our approach as we go along. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Aaron and then Becca.
Yeah, as one of the people said, it's really important that we get this right. And I think the amount of effort that this committee has been putting forth and the comment we're trying to get back is an attempt to do that. But we also have to recognize that while we'll try to make the best choice, we're probably not going to be able to, satisfy everyone, but we're going to do our best.
Thank you. Becca and then Jillian.
I feel like I have a lot I could say, but I think I will, similar to Karen, really echo what the comment around what do we lose by removing the dam. And I think one thing that I also keep thinking about is sometimes I feel like there's this feeling that by removing the spillway of sort of a paved paradise and put in a parking lot, like, no, we're not. Like, there's the idea with removing a spillway is you still have a natural flow of a river. And so I think about what they shared around having a healthy ecosystem and a resilient ecosystem. To me, that speaks a lot. And so I wasn't expecting to get so much out of this presentation with my background, and I really did. So.
Great, thank you. Jillian and then Kristen.
I'm like Becca. I feel like I could say a lot. I do want to comment on just how appreciative I am of the committee and also Nick and Allison, but I really feel like this is like an all-star team of volunteers from Natick. So I'm just so grateful to be on this committee with you and appreciate you in that way. I guess at the end of this meeting, I kind of have three different questions that are on my mind. And the first is related to our interest in more site data. And I actually am a data geek, so I love data. But the thing that I wonder and kind of worry about is how will the data we collect today be different in the future due to climate change? And can we really forecast that or understand, like, will climate change really exacerbate some of the issues that the current data will show? And should that weigh into our decision-making process? And that gets me to my next question, which is, how much as a community do we value the ecological benefits of dam removal? And how do we weight that? And thinking of what Janine said about, the different use of the river by different entities other than people, and I don't know, the interplay of it all. And then I was thinking a lot about what we lose in that question. And I shared this kind of corny question with some of the town staff about this idea I had recently, which is, if there wasn't a dam there today, how would we feel if a dam was put there? And it's kind of been an interesting thought for me. So I just wanted to share that with the team.
Thank you, Jillian. Kristen, and then David Yancey.
Jillian, that was a great segue. I appreciate you all. I'll be completely candid that this was a very difficult space to be in, and I can feel very isolated as a Nipmuc person. But I am hearing a lot of the same feelings resonate with other folks, and so I appreciate you all. Nipmuc people are freshwater people. We're born and kin to the riverways. It's part of our cosmovision, and so, you'll be able to hear more at the cultural presentation, but I sat here wondering, like, oh man, is this even gonna land? Am I putting myself out there and sharing really important cultural knowledge for folks that are not going to understand? Because I did tonight. The question of how would we feel if it was put there? There's documented petitions of my ancestors from the Mass Bay Colony petitioning around the dams that were put in our river systems and the impact that was having in feeding the people. And so the fish are absolutely critical, as well as all the other species. And we're long-term people, like, we think long-term, right? And so even this question of, like, well, immediately it might not happen, but most Indigenous people mirror their decisions over natural systems. And so we don't feel we have authority. We need to be in deep relationship. We consider all other natural things kin. And so I'm urging us to not separate the human from the ecological standpoint and see ourselves as kin. And how would you feel about a family member being blocked or dying at a fish ladder? And I hope, I have more space in the next presentation to go into that, but I thought I would help give this little segue so that it's not very abrupt of, like, where is this all coming from? But it's deeply rooted and very historical. Some of the first dams in America were put in this area, and it's super important. The decisions that were made in the past have had really profound ecological impacts, and I think we have an opportunity to do something different.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And David Yancey.
I think we lost David.
Did we just lose him? Oh no. All right. Thank you all. I appreciate all of you. I know some of you have another meeting to go to, and everyone else has their Thursday evening. We will see you in a few weeks. Be in touch anytime about any of this. Let's keep the conversation going. Be well. Take care of yourselves. Thank you.